I didn't know it would be my last supper with them. If I had, maybe I would have made the roast a little saltier just to taste something real through all that silence. I'd spent that Sunday afternoon, like I always had, sleeves rolled up, oven humming, the whole kitchen perfumed with garlic and rosemary. The pot roast had been in the slow cooker since morning. Cornbread was golden and cracked just right along the top, still singing in the cast iron. Creamed corn, mashed potatoes, brown gravy from the pan drippings, the kind of meal that takes a whole day to love into existence. The table was set with the good plates, napkins folded into little triangles, the way my mother taught me, candles lit, the old centerpiece of dried hydrangeas and pine cones from a craft fair I went to in '98. It looked tired now, but it was tradition. That table had heard everything: heartbreaks, birthdays, scoldings, confessions whispered over pie. I heard them coming down the stairs, my son Matthew and Trish. She wore those noise-canceling earbuds until she hit the bottom step, then popped one out like she was doing the house a favor. He looked tired, or maybe that was just how he looked now. Since the layoff, since moving back in, since her. They sat. No grace, no words. Matthew offered a flat "smells good." Trish didn't say anything, just pulled out a glass container of some grainy-looking salad with purple onions and goat cheese, and set it beside her plate. I served them anyway. Pot roast first, then spoonfuls of everything else. I didn't wait to be asked. That's what you do when you're the one holding the ladle and 30 years of habit. When I got back around to my seat, I saw the food sitting untouched. Trish was on her phone. She looked up, smiled like she'd just remembered I was still there, and said, "Let's retire the old lady food, huh?" I laughed. It was a small sound cracked at the edges. Matthew didn't even flinch. He just said, "We're thinking about switching up Sunday dinners. Maybe something lighter, more modern. Like my mashed potatoes were offensive. Like gravy was obsolete." I looked down at my hands, still holding the serving spoon, shaking a little. "Well," I said quietly, "I suppose we can make room for both." Trish shrugged. "It's just, the heavy stuff. It's a lot." She took a single bite of her quinoa salad and wiped her mouth with the napkin I had ironed that morning. My roast sat untouched on her plate, steam still rising. I didn't say anything else. I just picked up my fork and took a bite of the pot roast. It was tender, slow cooked just right. I tasted the bay leaf. The fat had melted into the meat. It was good. But it didn't matter. The silence stretched thin. The only sound was the clink of Matthew's fork against his plate, and even that was half-hearted. No one asked about my week. No one thanked me for the meal. There were no seconds, no compliments, no laughter. Just silence, the kind that makes a room feel smaller. When I stood to clear the plates, I saw that Trish had already covered hers with her napkin. Matthew said, "You don't have to clean everything up right now." I looked at him and smiled the way you do when your child says something too late. "I know," I said, "but it helps me think." I carried the dishes into the kitchen one at a time, each plate heavier than the last. From the sink, I could still hear them in the dining room murmuring, her voice low, decisive, his more uncertain. And then, clear as church bells, I heard Trish say, "She's not going to be here forever. You need to talk to the lawyer." My hand froze over the running water. I stared at the suds floating in the sink. They were talking about me like I was already gone. A problem to be solved. I wiped my hands on the dish towel and leaned against the counter. The pot roast was still warm. I could have offered them to-go containers like I always did. I didn't. I wrapped up the leftovers for myself. Just me. That night I couldn't sleep. The house felt strange, like it was deciding who it belonged to, and maybe for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure it was me. I lay awake most of that night, eyes on the ceiling fan turning slowly above me, carving long, lazy shadows across the walls. I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I'd given that to them months ago. Said the stairs hurt my knees. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The real reason was simpler. I'd started to feel like an intruder in my own home. The pull-out sofa in the den creaked with every shift of my hips. The mattress was thin. You could feel the metal frame beneath it no matter how many quilts I layered on top. There was a time I would have never allowed myself to sleep there. That room used to be Matthew's playroom filled with plastic dinosaurs and Lego disasters. Now it held boxes of Trish's old real estate training books and a dusty stationary bike no one used. I stared at the shadows. Trish's words from dinner still echoed in my mind. Let's retire the old lady food. It wasn't just about dinner. It never was. The next morning, I was up before them like always. I made coffee-buttered toast and stood at the kitchen window watching the sparrows jostle over the feeder. The sun cut through the glass, lighting up the dust on the counter like gold flecks. I thought about calling my sister, but she'd passed last spring. I'd never gotten used to her silence on the other end. Trish came downstairs around 8. Hair wrapped in a silk scarf, earbuds already in mug in hand. "Could we not fry anything this morning?" she said, waving a hand. "It lingers." "It's just toast," I said calmly as I sliced another piece. Matthew followed a few minutes later, gave me a half smile and asked if we were out of oat milk. They poured their drinks and went straight back upstairs, closing the door behind them. I stood there in the kitchen holding a knife in one hand and a slice of bread in the other, listening to nothing. That's how it went for the next few weeks. Quiet rejections, 1,000 tiny exclusions. I'd make dinner and they'd eat out. I'd ask how their day was and Trish would blink at me like I was speaking another language. She left her dirty dishes in the sink. Matthew stopped joining me for coffee. My house was shrinking around me. I could feel it in the walls, a slow contraction. One afternoon, I came home from the market to find Trish in the dining room measuring the walls. I asked if she was redecorating. She laughed and said, "We're thinking of converting it into a dual workstation space. Something fresh. The whole dining room thing feels outdated." That room had been my altar. I still had the candle wax stain on the floor from the night Matthew turned 16, and we ran out of power during a thunderstorm. We'd eaten birthday cake by flashlight, him wearing that stupid paper crown I made from wrapping paper. I walked into the kitchen and sat down. My legs felt weak, like they were suddenly made of paper. That night I opened the old buffet cabinet in the corner and started polishing the silver, not for any occasion. I just needed to hold something that used to matter. When I reached the bottom drawer, I found a photo tucked behind the linen runners. It was from Matthew's graduation. He was wearing that silly, oversized gown, grinning with cake frosting on his lip. I was standing beside him, one hand on his shoulder, the other holding a serving tray of fried chicken and deviled eggs. Everyone had eaten until they were stuffed. He used to brag about my cooking. I stared at that photo for a long time, tracing the outline of his face with my thumb. Something twisted in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Just a deep aching vacancy, like I'd been slowly erased from the life I helped build. That Sunday I didn't cook. I sat in the den and turned the TV to a quiet documentary about birds. I waited. Around 5:30, I heard footsteps upstairs, voices, then the front door opening. They were going out to dinner. No invitation. No explanation. When the door shut behind them, I stood up and walked into the kitchen. Took out the pot roast from the freezer, the one I'd saved just in case, and slid it into the oven. I made cornbread from memory the way I used to when money was tight, and we had nothing but flour and pride. I set one place at the table. Just one. With the good plates. And I ate alone. The food tasted better that way. I started noticing the cold in ways I hadn't before. Not the kind that comes through the windows in February, but the kind that lives in a glance in the way a chair is left pulled too far from the table, or a door is closed just a second too fast. It lived in the mornings when I came into the kitchen and found that Trish had already brewed her own coffee and left a single-used K-cup in the trash like a marker saying, "I was here and I needed nothing from you." It was a Thursday night when I realized the dinners were over. I had made baked chicken thighs and green beans, a simple dish, the kind you make when you don't want to try too hard, but can't bring yourself to stop caring. I plated the food, set it on the stove, and waited. The clock ticked past 7. I went upstairs and knocked on their door. "We already ate," Trish called out, cheerful and sharp. A pause. Matthew didn't say anything. I walked back downstairs, sat alone, and looked at the untouched plates. Then I scraped everything into Tupperware. There was no point in asking anymore. The next morning, Trish asked if I could move some of my things out of the coat closet. She said they needed more space for their jackets. It was September, still hot. No one needed a coat. Then she laughed and added, "You've got stuff in every corner of this house. Makes it hard to breathe." I stood there holding a basket of folded dish towels and realized that's exactly what they were doing, pushing me out one drawer, one closet, one meal at a time. Not with cruelty, not even with argument, just erasure. That night I pulled the old photo albums out from under my bed, the one that used to be mine upstairs before I offered it to them. I sat on the sofa bed with the albums in my lap, flipping through the pages. There was one photo that stopped me cold, Matthew, age 6, sitting on the kitchen counter while I iced a birthday cake. His hands were covered in chocolate frosting, and I was laughing, really laughing. It wasn't staged. It wasn't posed. We were just there in it together. I touched that photo and tried to remember the last time he'd laughed with me like that. Not at me, not politely near me, with me. It had been years. The next week I made a grocery list for myself only. Just one portion of chicken, one head of lettuce, one box of tea. Trish saw it on the counter and raised an eyebrow. Stocking up for something. "No," I said, just trying not to waste anything. She didn't respond, just walked away. The days started folding into each other. I stopped opening the dining room drapes. I stopped checking for their car in the driveway. I stopped listening for the sound of the door opening after work, the little grunt of tired feet kicking off shoes. Then one afternoon I passed by the hall and saw their door cracked open. I wasn't snooping, not at first. But then I heard my name. "She just lingers," Trish said. "It's like living with a ghost." Matthew murmured something I couldn't make out. "She doesn't need the house," she continued. "It's too much for her. I know she loves it, but we need to start thinking practically." "I mean, legally, is she even still protected under the current deed?" Matthew mumbled again. "You said you'd talk to the lawyer. I'm not trying to be cruel, but if we're stuck here forever playing house with your mom, we're never going to move forward." I stepped away before I heard more. My heart wasn't racing. That was the strangest part. I wasn't shocked. Not anymore. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and stared out the window as the yard light clicked on. The wind picked up rustling the dry branches of the apple tree I'd planted the year Matthew was born. It was the first tree to bloom every spring, always a little too early, always defiant. I wondered if they knew the house was still in my name. I wondered if they knew what the word trust meant legally speaking. I wondered if they'd forgotten who had made this place. I didn't feel rage. Not yet. I just felt finished. It was the cornbread recipe that reminded me who I was. Strange, maybe, but I suppose memory settles where it wants. Not always in anniversaries or photos, but in small things, a sound, a smell, a folded card tucked in the back of a drawer. Mine lived in a recipe tin buried under years of dish towels in the lowest kitchen cabinet. I wasn't looking for it, not really. I was just cleaning. That's what I do when I can't speak the thing that's sitting in my throat. I'd gone through all the cabinets that morning, wiped down every shelf, lined the drawers with new contact paper. Trish had mentioned updating the kitchen. I thought if I made it spotless, maybe she'd hesitate. Maybe she'd see it wasn't hers to erase. When I pulled out the old tin, my breath caught. It was blue-chipped at the corners, hinges rusted, but it still clicked shut with that soft metallic snap that used to echo through my childhood. My mother kept her recipes in it. When she passed, it came to me same as the cast iron, same as the linen runners, same as this house. I opened the lid. Inside were the index cards, yellowed and soft with age. My own handwriting, my mother's, even a few from neighbors long gone. But wedged beneath the card labeled cornbread, holiday version. I found something else. A letter. Folded, sealed in a plain white envelope. No stamp. My name written in my husband's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I just sat on the floor of that kitchen and held it in my lap. He'd been gone almost 8 years. Sometimes I still expected to hear the jangle of his keys, the heavy thud of his boots on the porch. But here he was again, waiting in my hands. When I opened it, the paper trembled in my fingers. The ink had faded some, but the message was still clear. If you're reading this, it means something feels wrong. Don't forget, we protected the house. The trust is in your name. Don't let anyone make you small in your own home. I know you. You don't break. Love, James. I read it twice, then 3 more times. My hands shook not from fear, but from something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Solidness. He was right. I hadn't broken. But I had bent. Bent so far I didn't recognize my own shape anymore. I took the letter and walked to the filing cabinet in the hallway, opened the bottom drawer, pulled out the manila folder marked House, Trust Docs. Everything was still there, the original trust papers, the updated deed, the notarized affidavit. All of it in my name. No cosigner. No survivorship clause. Just me. Trish must have assumed the house was community property, that she could chip away at me until I handed it over, but she never read the documents. She never asked. She just assumed. I put everything in a clean folder and locked it in the cabinet. Later that afternoon, I went out to get the mail. A white envelope stood out addressed to Trish L. Hammond. The return address was a mortgage lender. I don't know what made me open it. I shouldn't have, but I did. Inside was a denial letter. They had applied for a home equity loan. Application declined. Title discrepancy, applicant not named on trust. I stared at the letter for a long time, the wind fluttering the edge of my cardigan. So they had tried, behind closed doors without telling me. They thought they could take something I'd built with 2 hands and 100 sacrifices. I slid the letter back into the envelope and set it on the console table right where she'd find it. That night, I made myself dinner-baked fish rice sautéed spinach. I ate alone. The house was quiet. I didn't feel hollow this time. I felt sharpened. I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. The next morning, Trish didn't say a word. She passed me in the hallway, tight smile envelope in hand. But her eyes were different, just a flicker. A glimmer of something that looked like unease. Matthew barely looked up from his coffee. I sipped my tea slowly, let the silence sit between us. They thought I didn't know, that I was just an old woman with soft hands and good manners. But I had spent 30 years becoming invisible, and in that invisibility I'd learned to see everything. They wanted the house. But they'd forgotten one thing. It wasn't given to me. It was earned. It happened on a Tuesday. The air was heavy with the kind of humidity that made your clothes stick to you even inside. I had the back windows cracked just enough to let in a breeze, but the curtains barely moved. The house felt still, waited. I just finished folding laundry in the den when I heard Trish's voice louder than usual. Not yelling, not yet, but clipped, sharp at the edges. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor like gunshots. "Do you have a minute?" I turned and found her standing in the doorway, arms folded across her chest, her lipstick too bright for morning, her smile too tight. "Of course," I said. She walked in like she owned the place, like she was hosting me. Matthew hovered behind her, hands in his pockets, not looking at me. She got straight to it. "We've been talking," she began, "and we feel like it's time for some clarity about the house." I didn't speak. I just watched her, that always made people uncomfortable silence. I let her fill it. "It's not that we're ungrateful," she continued, "but this arrangement, it's not really sustainable anymore. For any of us." I still didn't respond. She cleared her throat. "So we're asking that you consider transferring the deed, just for practical purposes. Streamlining. Legal simplicity. We can even add you on as a resident." A resident? Matthew still hadn't said a word. His eyes stayed on the floor. I stood slowly, folded the towel I was holding, and placed it on the coffee table. "You want me to give you my home," I said. "Is that what you're asking?" She bristled. "It's not about taking anything. It's about updating what already reflects reality. We're maintaining the house now. We pay utilities. We're handling repairs. I pay the taxes. I interrupted calm as winter. The mortgage was paid off 8 years ago. There are no repairs." Trish opened her mouth, then closed it. I turned to Matthew. "Is this what you want?" He looked at me then for the first time in a long time. And what I saw in his face wasn't hatred. It was something worse. Guilt. But not enough of it. "She just wants to feel secure," he said. "So do I." "Then you should have thought of that before you filled out a fraudulent loan application in a house that doesn't belong to you," I said. The silence that followed was electric. Her face drained of color. Matthew looked like he might sink straight into the floor. I walked to the corner hutch and pulled out the folder, the one with the trust documents, the rejection letter, the notarized deed. I laid it gently on the coffee table. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "The house is held in a living trust. My name is the only one on it, has been since James died. And I've already spoken to a lawyer." Trish blinked rapidly like something was burning behind her eyes. "You snooped through our mail," she hissed. I smiled a small, tired smile. "No. You left it right where I could see it." She stepped back suddenly, unsure. "You can't just..." You don't understand how this works. Oh, I said, sitting back down. I understand perfectly. I let the weight of that hang in the room. Then I added, I'll be moving back into the master bedroom this week. I expect my things to be out of storage and the furniture reset by Friday. Matthew finally spoke barely above a whisper. You're kicking us out. No, I said gently. I'm asking you to behave like guests again if you plan to stay. Trish's mouth opened, then closed again. Her hands shook slightly. For the first time, she looked small in that room. I stood. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I fed you, housed you, made room for your lives while mine shrank. I held my tongue for months while you dismissed me at my own table, erased the life I built, one drawer, one meal, one Sunday at a time. And now you want my name? I stepped closer. No, I said. You don't get to rewrite me out of my own story. And then I walked past them, not fast, not dramatic, just steady. In the kitchen, I pulled out the cast iron skillet, set it on the stove, turned on the burner. I heard Trish crying. I didn't go check. Matthew said something low and angry. I didn't catch it. The skillet hissed softly as it heated. I cracked 2 eggs, dropped them in the pan, and watched them sizzle, the yolks blooming like sunflowers in morning light. For the first time in months, I was hungry. The days after the confrontation moved slow like molasses in cold weather. Not heavy exactly, just thick with things unsaid. Trish avoided me altogether. I'd hear her heels upstairs pacing, muttering on the phone in that brittle clipped tone she reserved for people she couldn't control. I didn't care what she was saying, not anymore. Her voice sounded smaller now, like it couldn't fill a room the way it used to. Matthew was quieter than ever. He passed me in the hallway like a stranger might, polite nodding, but never quite meeting my eyes. Once I caught him standing at the bottom of the stairs, just staring at the door to the master bedroom where my things had been moved back in. He didn't knock. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked away. I'd already had the locks changed. Not in anger, just caution. I spent most of my time in the garden that week. The hydrangeas had wilted in the heat, but the rosemary was still thriving. I trimmed it back, tied little bundles, hung them in the kitchen to dry. The smell made the whole house feel new again. Or maybe not new, just mine. There was peace in the small rituals, folding linens, brewing tea, setting the table for one. One afternoon I baked the cornbread again. Same tin, same recipe. Only this time I added something extra, not in the batter, but in the way I moved through the kitchen. Slower, certain, like I didn't need anyone to tell me I belonged there. When it was done, I sat by the window and ate a square with honey drizzled on top. Outside, the wind tugged gently at the apple tree branches, the ones I thought might have died last winter. But there were new buds coming in. Small, pink, persistent things. By the end of the week, their suitcases appeared by the front door. No announcement. No fight. Just there, zipped up tight like the last word in a conversation no one wanted to finish. Trish didn't say goodbye. Matthew did. He stood in the kitchen, hands in the same old pockets, eyes on the tile. I didn't know she filed that loan, he said. Not at first. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't believe him, but because it didn't matter anymore. I just thought it would all work out, he added. It did, I said. Just not for you. He nodded once, swallowed hard, and walked out. I watched them load the car. I didn't wave. When the house was quiet again, truly quiet, I walked room to room with my bare feet on the hardwood. The silence didn't feel heavy now. It felt earned. In the dining room, I pulled open the curtains. Light spilled over the table like honey. I ran my hand along the back of each chair, not to straighten them, just to feel something real. Later that evening, I made a small roast, just a half portion, and set one place at the table. I lit a candle. Just one. No centerpiece. I didn't say grace aloud, but I breathed deeply and closed my eyes. The food was warm. The wine was dry. The silence was soft. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no music swelling in the background. No applause. Just me. Just the sound of my fork on a real plate. The flicker of the candle in the glass. Some victories don't come with noise. They come with stillness. And I was full not just from the food, but from the knowing that I had survived something, that I had reclaimed something, that I had never really lost it in the first place. The first morning after they left the house felt like it exhaled. Not all at once, but slow like a body releasing pain it didn't even realize it had been holding. The air moved differently. The boards didn't creak under tension. The refrigerator hummed steady and alone. I made coffee and sat in my own kitchen, elbows on the table, hair still a mess, no one there to comment or flinch. I took up space. I let my sighs be loud. I let the floor carry the weight of me without apology. There was mail in the box, of course. Utilities still needed paying. A few flyers, a gardening catalog, and one envelope with an embossed law firm header I didn't recognize. I opened it slowly, carefully, like it might hiss back. Inside was a copy of a notice of petition, nothing active, not yet. A veiled threat, really. An inquiry into ownership status and contributions of non-deed residents, likely sent by some junior associate trying to flex. Trish's name wasn't on it, but the return address belonged to a boutique firm specializing in property disputes. I read the first page, then read it again. Then I smiled. I pulled out a pen and wrote a note to my lawyer. They're trying again. Please respond with full trust documentation and statement of sole ownership. Also add clause re bad faith inquiry. I sealed the envelope and walked it to the mailbox barefoot. The pavement was warm underfoot. September warmth. The kind that stays just long enough to remind you summer was real. When I came back inside, the smell of rosemary hit me. I'd forgotten I left a bundle simmering on the stove in a pot of water, my grandmother's old trick to scent a house. It smelled like memory, like resilience. That afternoon, I started going through the attic. Years of things packed away, Matthew's old trophies, holiday ornaments, photo albums. I sorted everything slowly, gently, not to erase the past, but to make peace with it. In the bottom of one box, I found a letter my husband had written to our son, undated in an envelope never mailed. I recognized James's handwriting right away. It had his old stubborn slant always leaning uphill. The letter was short. Careful. Matthew. There will come a time when your mother will need you more than you realize. When that time comes, remember what she gave up so you could grow. Your strength will come from honoring that. Don't confuse her silence for weakness. She is steel. Don't make her prove it. I sat with that for a long time, just holding it, just reading it again and again. It didn't feel like forgiveness. It felt like witness. And that was enough. That evening, I took a walk through the backyard. The grass had gone to seed a bit. The fence needed mending, but the air smelled like pine and sky and something old enough to survive. The kitchen light was on when I came back in, casting long golden lines across the floor. The same light that used to catch James at the sink, humming old country songs, elbows deep in suds. The same light that once caught Matthew trying to sneak cookies before dinner. The same light that now poured over my own hands, still strong. Still here. I poured a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my old recipe book. Not because I needed it. I knew every page by heart, but because I wanted to turn each one like a prayer. Each dish was a monument. Each memory a room I had built with my own 2 hands. They could threaten me with letters, with lawyers, with words dressed up to sound like power. But I had the deeds, the documents, the living trust, and more than that, I had the kitchen, the house, the table, and the silence that belonged only to me. The house settled into itself like an old dog returning to its favorite chair. With every passing day, I reclaimed it not just legally, but spiritually. I repainted the master bedroom a shade of soft cream, took down the cheap blackout curtains Trish had insisted on, and hung up lace ones instead. Sunlight came in again, slanting across the floor in slow golden stripes. I moved my sewing machine back into the guest room, refolded the linens with lavender sachets, scrubbed the baseboards in silence. Everything I touched remembered me. One morning, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened it to find a young man in a blazer holding a leather briefcase and a clipboard. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm from the firm of Deller, Reeves and Huntley. I believe you received a letter from our office last week." I smiled. Not warm, not cruel, just neutral like a mirror. "I did," I said. "My attorney has already responded." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. But we've been asked to make a formal inquiry into the status of your property deed, specifically whether the property is being withheld from a cohabiting family member under duress." I laughed then. Not loud, just a single breath of amusement like a wind through dry grass. "Come on in," I said. "I think you'll want to read something." I led him to the dining room and placed the manila folder on the table, the one with the originals, the certified copies, the notarized statements. And then I pulled out a laminated document from a plastic sleeve. Living Trust of Eleanor Thompson. Dated October 14th, 2017. Excerpt. Sections 4.1 and 5.3. 4.1. Sole Ownership Clause. The residential property located at 108 Greystone Lane, filed under County Parcel number 37377-5, shall remain in the sole ownership of Eleanor F. Thompson, trustee and grantor for the duration of her life, or until voluntarily sold or reassigned under her direct consent. No cohabitant, familial, or otherwise shall be granted rights of survivorship, automatic inheritance, or authority to refinance, sublease, or restructure financial interest in said property. 5.3. Protection against undue influence. In the event of dispute, challenge, or evidence of coercion against the grantor by a resident or family member, this trust shall defer to original documentation submitted by legal counsel of record Robert T. Mendelsohn and Prince LLP. Any inquiry against said trust shall be considered null and void, unless explicitly accompanied by evidence of mental or legal incompetence, evaluated by a state-certified third-party specialist, and verified by 2 medical professionals. When the man finished reading, he cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. "Well then," he said softly, "that's quite clear." I nodded. "It is. I'm sorry for the inconvenience." "I'm not," I said. It helped remind me of who I am. He looked down suddenly, unsure whether to apologize again or take his leave. I let him squirm a second longer than necessary. "You'll tell Trish I added that I won't be hearing from her again." "I will." And with that, he left. I closed the door behind him, locked it, and leaned my back against the wood. It was quiet. And then I laughed again, this time full with my whole chest. The kind of laugh that rises from the earth of you. The kind that says you survived. I walked into the kitchen and turned the kettle on. The blue enamel one I'd nearly thrown out when they made fun of it called it Grandma Kitch. It whistled bright and clear like a train leaving the station. I sat at the table and wrote a letter to myself in my journal. You didn't just keep the house. You kept the ground beneath your name. You kept your name. You kept your voice. And they couldn't take it. Later that night, I passed by Matthew's old room. The door was open. Empty shelves. The air still holding a faint trace of shaving cream and cologne. I stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure of what I was waiting for. Then I turned out the light. Some things don't need to be filled. They just need to be left alone. It was almost October when I noticed the leaves starting to turn at the edge of the yard, a burnt red creeping into the maples, like a secret being whispered through the branches. That's when the air changes around here. You smell the shift before you feel it. It's in the way the light angles through the curtains, softer but somehow more honest. I'd taken to eating breakfast in the sunroom again. Trish used to call it wasted square footage, and Matthew said it got too hot in summer, but it was never about comfort. It was about the quiet. The way morning came in gently through those tall windows, the way the birds perched close enough you could almost reach out and touch their wings. That morning I sat with my tea and a single slice of cinnamon toast. No rush. The world didn't demand anything from me anymore. I had given enough. And yet even in the stillness I felt something in my chest, not fear, not quite. A shadow of it. Something ancient and hollow that crept in now and then, whispering, "What if they come back? What if he begs? What if you miss the boy you raised more than you hate the man he became?" That's the part no one tells you about reclaiming your power. It doesn't arrive clean. It doesn't erase what was. Sometimes it amplifies the ache, shines a brighter light on everything you used to swallow in the dark. There were moments in those weeks after the legal letters stopped where I thought about calling him, just to hear his voice, just to see if he missed me, just to ask what he remembered from those years I poured every ounce of myself into him like a pitcher that never asked to be filled back up, but I didn't. Instead, I found myself talking out loud in the house, not to anyone really, just to the rooms. "Well, that shelf needs tightening. James, you'd hate the wallpaper she picked, wouldn't you? Cornbread's a little dry this time. I'll adjust the buttermilk next week." I wasn't going crazy. I knew that. I was just settling into the echo, making peace with the silence that had once haunted me, but now stood gently beside me like an old friend who knew when not to speak. Sometimes I'd take walks in the neighborhood and pass other women my age, some with grandkids, some walking alone, some looking at me like they knew. Like we were in on the same quiet secret that peace is never given, only carved out with the blunt knives of betrayal, loneliness, and resolve. At the grocery store, I ran into Darlene, an old friend from church. She hadn't seen me in a while. "You look lighter," she said, eyes narrowing in curiosity. "I've been doing some cleaning," I said. She smiled. "Let me guess your daughter-in-law finally moved out." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. It was already written on my face. That night, I pulled the old quilt from the top shelf in the linen closet, the one I'd made with my mother's fabric scraps. It still smelled faintly of cedar. I wrapped myself in it and sat on the front porch, watching the moon rise behind the trees. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to end or begin. I just was. And that was enough. I found his voicemail 2 weeks later. It was buried under a dozen missed spam calls, car insurance scams, some automated nonsense about Medicare fraud. I almost deleted it without listening. But something made me pause. Maybe it was the area code. Or maybe it was that same twist in my stomach I always got when I passed by the hallway and saw his old bedroom door still half open, like he might walk out any moment with that lopsided smile and ask what was for dinner. The message was short. "Hey, Mom. It's Matt. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I thought maybe, I don't know, maybe we could talk. I'm staying at a motel off Route 6 for a bit. Not sure where we're landing yet. Just call me if you want. Or don't. I get it." He hung up without saying goodbye. I stood in the middle of the kitchen for a long time. The kettle had started to whistle on the stove, but I didn't move to stop it. The sound rose and filled the house like a scream too polite to say out loud. I didn't call him back. Not that night. Not the next day, either. I spent that weekend tending to the garden, trimming back the marigolds, pulling weeds along the fence. I painted the shed door the color of ripe tomatoes. Every task felt like a reclamation not of the house, but of the time I had allowed to be stolen from me in tiny pieces over the years. Guilt when it came was a dull ache. Manageable. A phantom pain from an old injury. I wrote his number down on a Post-it note and tucked it inside a drawer. That was as far as I let it go. And then on Sunday I baked again. A full roast. Potatoes, carrots, thick gravy from the pan drippings. I made the cornbread just the way I used to. I even set 2 places at the table, not out of hope, but habit. And I sat. I cut the roast. I ate my half. I let the other plate cool. The chair across from me stayed empty. After dinner, I boxed up the leftovers and walked them to the community fridge down by the church. Left them without a note. Someone would eat. Someone would be warm tonight. Someone who'd never call me a ghost in my own home. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing out my hair slowly, strand by strand. My face looked different somehow. Not younger. Not older either. Just settled. Like all the jagged pieces had finally been arranged into something whole. It wasn't victory, not in the cinematic sense. There was no cheering, no final takedown, no moment of triumph. But there was peace. And peace, I was learning, was the loudest kind of power. Later, as I turned down the covers on my bed, I thought about that voicemail again. There was a time I would have given everything just to hear him say my name with warmth, to know he missed me, to believe we could rebuild something. But rebuilding isn't always holy. Sometimes it's just reopening the same wound. So I turned off the light, slid into bed, and slept. Dreamless. Whole. I found the letter tucked inside one of my old cookbooks, Southern Fare, from the front porch. Pages yellowed at the edges, corners dog-eared, splattered with sauce and memory. I hadn't opened it in years, not since the last Thanksgiving before James passed. Back when the house still felt full. The letter wasn't dated. Just folded and slipped between 2 pages, chicken and dumplings on the left, pecan pie with bourbon syrup on the right. It was addressed to Matthew. The handwriting was mine. I didn't even remember writing it. I sat down at the kitchen table and unfolded the page. The paper was soft, fragile from time, like the voice I'd had back then, afraid to speak what was true, but needing to find some shape for the ache inside me. Dear Matthew, I don't know if I'll ever give this to you. Maybe I'm writing it just to feel sane, Just to feel like I still exist in this house, not as a caretaker or a cook, not as some piece of old furniture, but as your mother. I don't know when you stopped seeing me. I think maybe it happened slow, the way dust gathers in corners, quietly, invisibly, until one day you realize the lights changed and everything is duller. You used to bring me wildflowers. Do you remember that? You were 9? You'd come in from the yard sweaty and proud, holding out a fistful of clover and weeds like they were roses. I cried once when you did that. You asked why. I told you it was because I was happy. That was true, but also because I knew it wouldn't last. You got taller, and I got quieter. I gave up a lot, and I don't say that to guilt you, I really don't. I just need it written somewhere. I need someone to know. The roast dinners, the mending the house you sleep in, I gave those, freely. But I didn't give away my place. That was taken, slowly, with your silence. If you ever read this, if I ever find the courage to hand it to you, I hope you'll understand that love can stretch and still snap. Love, Mom. I folded it carefully, pressed it flat. I didn't cry. There was nothing left in me that needed release. I wasn't grieving what had happened anymore. I was standing in the space of what hadn't. The apology that never came. The door that never reopened. The love that had changed shape without permission. That night I sat out on the back porch wrapped in the old quilt. The moon hung low, round and forgiving. The trees moved like old women whispering to each other in church pews. I lit a candle and placed it on the railing. Not for mourning, for memory. And then I burned the letter, watched the edges curl, then catch, then disappear. Some truths aren't meant to be handed over. Some are meant to be buried like seeds. The flames died quickly as if they'd been waiting to be set free. When I went back inside, I opened the fridge and saw the leftover cornbread from the day before. Just one piece left. I reheated it, ate it at the kitchen sink. No plate, no performance. Just me chewing slowly, tasting the layers of history baked into it. It wasn't sweet anymore, but it was mine. The house creaks differently now. Not with tension, but with memory, like it sighs sometimes, remembering the weight it used to hold. Some days I walk room to room with no particular reason, just touching things, the edge of the mantel, the curve of a doorknob, the smooth lip of the mixing bowl I've had since 1986. These things remember me. There's a softness to the silence these days. Not emptiness. Not loneliness, just space. Space to think, space to breathe. Space to finally hear my own voice again. I still make Sunday dinners, just for me. Last week, I made smothered chicken collard greens and skillet cornbread with real buttermilk. I set the table like I always did. Cloth napkin candle in the center, my mother's worn silverware. One plate. One glass. No second chair. I don't eat fast anymore. I take my time. I chew slower, swallow easier. I sit with the food like it's an old friend who came back just to see how I'm doing. Sometimes I talk to James, not out loud, just quietly in the way I fold the dish towel over the oven handle or place his old mug just right on the counter. I think he'd be proud of how I handled it all. Not with fire, not with rage, but with something stronger, the truth wrapped in stillness. The trust has been updated. My will is in order. The house will pass to who I choose, not who assumes they're owed it. And when I walk past the front porch now, I see the light. I replaced the one Trish said was too dated. It glows soft gold over the welcome mat. The real kind of welcome. The kind you don't have to earn, but also don't have the right to take. Some treasures had been recovered. Others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.